The watch stopped at 3:15, the exact moment Eliza's hands trembled over the tiny gears scattered across Caleb's kitchen table. She hadn't meant for him to see this, hadn't meant for anyone to know what she could do. But there he stood in the doorway, mud on his boots, surprise written across his weathered face. A mail-order bride wasn't supposed to have secrets. She wasn't supposed to carry tools in her trunk alongside her wedding dress. And she definitely wasn't supposed to be better at fixing things than any man in 3 counties. But Eliza Moore had always been good at breaking rules she never agreed to follow in the first place. Before we dive into Eliza's story, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this tale travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The stagecoach kicked up dust like a wounded animal trying to shake off its own death. Eliza pressed her handkerchief against her mouth, but the grit still found its way between her teeth, settling on her tongue with the bitter taste of distance and decisions that couldn't be unmade. Through the window, if you could call the leather flap a window, Kansas rolled past in shades of brown and gold, endless and indifferent. Redfield, miss, 10 minutes. The driver's voice carried over the clatter of wheels and the labored breathing of horses that had been running this route too long. Eliza nodded, though he couldn't see her. Her fingers found the letter in her pocket, the paper soft from being read and reread until the creases threatened to tear. Dear Miss Moore, I am a man of simple means and simpler words. I own land, cattle, and a house that needs a woman's presence. I do not drink to excess. I do not raise my hand in anger. I am looking for a partner, not a servant. If these terms are acceptable, wire your arrival date. Respectfully, Caleb Turner. Acceptable. The word had seemed reasonable 3 weeks ago in her boarding house room in St. Louis, with the landlady's threats about next month's rent echoing through thin walls. It had seemed downright generous compared to the alternative. Her cousin's offer to take her in as an unpaid nursemaid to 6 children under the age of 8. But now, watching the town materialize from the heat shimmer like something not quite real, acceptable felt like a word that meant nothing at all. The other passenger, a traveling salesman who'd spent the last 40 miles trying to sell her tooth powder and hair tonic, finally gave up and dozed off. Eliza was grateful for the silence. She used it to practice breathing steadily, the way her father had taught her before her hands learned to work on delicate things. Steady breath, steady hands, steady heart. The last part was her own addition, though her heart had never gotten the message. Redfield announced itself with a sun-bleached sign and not much else. Main Street stretched maybe 3 blocks, if you were generous with your measurements. A general store, a saloon, what looked like a church or a meeting hall, and a scattering of buildings that could have been anything. Horses stood tied to posts, tails swishing at flies. A dog slept in the shade of a water trough. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the general store, and Eliza's stomach lurched with it. "Redfield!" the driver called, as if there were any doubt. She gathered her carpet bag, the small one with her clothes and the tin daguerreotype of her parents. The larger trunk, the one with the tools wrapped in oilcloth and hidden beneath her winter coat, was strapped to the back of the coach. She'd labeled it kitchen items in careful script. No one had questioned it. The driver helped her down, his hands respectful, his eyes kind in a way that made her throat tight. "You being met, miss?" "Yes, I believe so." "Well?" He glanced around the empty street. "I'm sure he'll be along. We're a bit early." The salesman departed without a word, heading straight for the saloon. The driver began unhitching the horses, and Eliza stood there, alone on a street in a town she'd never seen, waiting for a man she wouldn't recognize. She moved to the shade of the store's overhang. A woman inside watched through the window, curious but not unfriendly. Eliza tried to smooth her traveling dress, gray wool that had seemed practical in St. Louis, but felt suffocating now. Her hair, pinned carefully that morning, had come loose in wispy strands that stuck to her damp neck. She looked, she thought, exactly like what she was, a woman who'd run out of choices. "Miss Moore?" The voice came from her left, quiet and uncertain. She turned. Caleb Turner was not what she'd expected, though she hadn't let herself expect much. He was tall, yes. That much the letter had mentioned, but the photograph he'd sent had been too faded to show details. He was older than she'd thought, maybe 35, with lines around his eyes that came from squinting into sun and wind. His face was weathered but not unkind, his shoulders broad under a work shirt that had seen better days. He held his hat in his hands, turning it slightly, a gesture that seemed unconscious. "Mr. Turner." She kept her voice level. "Yes, I'm Eliza Moore." They stood looking at each other for a moment that stretched too long. Eliza registered details without meaning to. Hands calloused and scarred, boots worn but well kept, eyes that were more gray than blue and harder to read than she would have liked. "Your trunk," he said finally. "I've got the wagon just there." "Thank you." He moved past her to speak with the driver, and Eliza caught the scent of horse and leather and something else, maybe sage, or the particular smell of distance. When he returned with her trunk balanced on one shoulder like it weighed nothing, she followed him to a wagon that had definitely seen better years. "It's about an hour to the ranch," Caleb said, loading her things with care. "Longer if the creek's up, but it shouldn't be this time of year." "That's fine." He helped her onto the seat, then climbed up beside her. The wagon springs creaked. The horses, two sturdy bays that looked as tired as Eliza felt, started forward without being told. They left Redfield behind in a matter of minutes. The silence between them wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. It was the silence of two people who didn't know what to say, so they said nothing. Eliza watched the landscape roll past. It was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way. Grass that moved like water, sky that went on forever, horizon lines that stayed stubbornly out of reach. "The letter," Caleb said abruptly. "You got my letter?" "Yes." "And the other one, the second one?" She had. It had arrived a week after the first, shorter and somehow more honest. "I should say that I'm not looking for romance or pretending. My first wife died 4 years ago. I'm not trying to replace her. I need help with the ranch and the house, and I'm willing to offer marriage in exchange for that help. If you're expecting love poetry and moonlight, you should probably take a different stage. But if you're practical and can work hard, we might suit each other well enough." "I got it," Eliza said. "Just wanted to be clear. Didn't want you thinking—" He stopped, started again. "Some men send letters full of promises they don't mean. Figured honesty was better." "I appreciate honesty." "Good." More silence. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals Eliza couldn't see. "Can you cook?" Caleb asked. "Yes." "So?" "When necessary." "Handle a horse?" "I've never tried." He nodded, processing this. "You'll learn. It's not complicated. Animals are simpler than people mostly." "I'll try not to take that personally." It slipped out before she could stop it, that little edge of humor that had gotten her in trouble more than once. But Caleb's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "Didn't mean it that way." "I know." They passed a soddy, half collapsed and abandoned. Then another. Signs of people who'd tried and failed to make this land give them something back. Eliza wondered if Caleb saw them or if they'd become invisible to him, part of the landscape like the grass and the sky. "Your letter," she said, surprising herself. "You mentioned your wife, if you don't mind my asking." "Fever." His voice went flat. "Winter of 72, fast and mean. Nothing anyone could do." "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." But the way he said it made her think it wasn't long enough. The wagon hit a rut, and Eliza grabbed the seat to steady herself. Caleb's hand shot out automatically, catching her elbow, then releasing it just as quickly. "Sorry, road gets rough here." "It's all right. I keep meaning to fill these in, but then spring comes and washes them out again. Seems pointless. Like sweeping dirt floors." Exactly like that. They shared a look, brief, startled, that held something close to understanding. The sun crawled lower. Eliza's body ached from travel, from tension, from the weight of not knowing what came next. She wanted to ask how much farther, but that seemed childish. She wanted to ask what he expected from her, but the answer might be worse than not knowing. Instead, she said, "Tell me about the ranch." Caleb shifted on the seat, thinking. 200 acres, about 50 head of cattle right now, though I'm building the herd back up. Lost some in the winter. There's a house, wood frame, not sod, with 3 rooms. Kitchen, main room, bedroom. Well water's good. Closest neighbor is the Patterson place, about 5 miles east. 5 miles. It's not town living. I didn't expect it to be. Some women do. Come out here thinking it'll be like back east, just with different scenery. Then winter hits, or they spend 3 days without seeing another soul, and they realize he stopped. Sorry, you didn't come all this way to hear me talk about other people's mistakes. But Eliza heard what he didn't say. His first wife had been one of those women. She'd come from somewhere else, expecting something different, and the prairie had broken her long before the fever finished the job. I'm not most women, Eliza said quietly. Caleb glanced at her, his expression unreadable. No, I don't suppose you are. The ranch appeared gradually, emerging from the sameness of the landscape like a thought becoming solid. The house stood alone on a slight rise, its wood siding weathered gray but intact. A barn, a corral, a chicken coop. Everything functional, nothing decorative. Behind it all, the land stretched away in waves of gold and green. It looked lonely. It looked like work. It looked like the end of the world and the beginning of something else, all at once. Caleb stopped the wagon near the house. Well, here we are. Yes. Neither of them moved. I thought, he said carefully, that we'd do the ceremony tomorrow. Give you a chance to settle in, see if... He cleared his throat. The Reverend comes through once a month. He's in Redfield now. I sent word we'd need him. Tomorrow's fine. There's a spare room. Was going to be a nursery, but... He stood abruptly, jumping down from the wagon. Anyway, you can sleep there tonight, until things are official. Thank you. He carried her trunk inside while Eliza followed, trying not to let her exhaustion show. The house was clean but sparse. A table, 4 chairs, a stove that had seen hard use, curtains at the windows, faded calico, carefully mended, signs of a woman's presence, carefully preserved. His first wife's presence. The spare room was small, just large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand. Caleb set her trunk down gently. There's water in the pitcher, not hot, but clean. I'll make supper in a bit, nothing fancy. I can help. You've been traveling all day. Rest. He left before she could argue, pulling the door closed behind him. Eliza sat on the bed, the ropes creaked but held, and looked around at the bare walls, the single window showing nothing but grass and sky. She had done it. She had actually done it. Gotten on a stagecoach, traveled hundreds of miles, and agreed to marry a stranger for the promise of food and shelter and a place in the world. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs, breathing slowly. This was practical. This was sensible. This was survival, not sentiment, and she'd made her peace with that. She'd known since her father died that the world wasn't interested in what she wanted, only in what she could do to make herself useful. The trunk sat against the wall, innocent and unassuming. Inside it, wrapped in oilcloth and her winter coat, were the tools her father had given her. The delicate picks and files, the magnifying glasses, the tiny screwdrivers, the watch movements he'd saved for her to practice on. The one finished timepiece she'd made herself, its case engraved with her initials in letters so small you needed steady hands and good eyes to read them. She'd brought them because leaving them behind had felt like leaving the last piece of her father in a boarding house where the landlady would have sold them for a few dollars and never known what they were worth. But she wouldn't tell Caleb, couldn't tell him. It was too strange, too unusual. Women weren't watchmakers, women weren't craftsmen, and men already had enough reasons to find their wives unsettling without adding she can disassemble a chronometer in under 10 minutes to the list. A knock at the door made her jump. Supper's ready, Caleb called through the wood. If you're hungry. I'll be right there. She splashed water on her face from the pitcher, tidied her hair as best she could, and went to meet the man she'd agreed to marry in approximately 18 hours. The meal was simple. Beans, cornbread, coffee that could strip paint. They ate in silence at first, the scrape of spoons on tin plates the only sound. Then Caleb said, Your family. The letter mentioned your father passed. Last year, pneumonia. Your mother? When I was 12, typhoid. He nodded. Death was common enough that it didn't require elaboration. Brothers? Sisters? No, just me. Must have been hard. After your father? Yes. She waited for him to ask what her father had done, what she had done, how she'd survived the year between his death and this moment. But he didn't. Either he already knew from her letters, or he understood that some questions didn't need answers. I've got a brother, Caleb offered. In Denver. Haven't seen him in 6 years. We don't write much. Do you miss him? He considered this. I miss the idea of him, maybe. The person I remember, but people change. Distance changes them more. Or maybe distance just lets them become who they already were. Caleb looked at her across the table, really looked at her, and Eliza felt suddenly exposed. Like he could see past the practical dress and the careful manners to the girl who'd spent her childhood in her father's workshop, learning to make tiny wheels turn and springs coil, becoming someone who didn't quite fit anywhere. Maybe, he said finally. After supper, he showed her around. The barn where 2 horses and a milk cow watched them with patient eyes, the chicken coop where a dozen hens settled in for the night, the well with its bucket and rope. Everything neat, everything maintained, everything speaking of a man who kept his word about not drinking or laziness. The sun was setting, painting the prairie in shades of orange and purple that seemed impossible, like the land was trying to apologize for its harshness during the day. "It's beautiful," Eliza said, and meant it. "It can be. Other times it'll try to kill you." Caleb's voice was matter-of-fact. "Storms, drought, winter, prairie doesn't care if you think it's pretty." "I suppose nothing does." "Care what we think, I mean." "No, I suppose not." They stood together in the fading light, 2 people who'd agreed to bind their lives together for reasons that had nothing to do with the sunset and everything to do with survival. "Reverend will be here around noon tomorrow," Caleb said. "I asked Patterson and his wife to stand witness. They're good people. You'll like them." "All right." "After, we'll have dinner. Then—" He stopped, started again. "I'm not expecting anything. Tomorrow night or any night. We'll figure things out as we go. No pressure." Eliza's chest tightened with something that might have been gratitude or relief or just exhaustion finally catching up. "Thank you. It's just practical, that's all." "Still, thank you." He nodded, then turned toward the barn. "I've got some things to finish up. You should rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." She watched him walk away, his stride unhurried, his shoulders carrying the weight of his own loneliness like something he'd gotten used to. Then she went back inside to the spare room that would be hers for one more night. Sleep should have come easily. She was tired enough. But instead, Eliza lay awake listening to unfamiliar sounds. The house settling, wind in the grass. Somewhere far off, a coyote called, and another answered. She thought about tomorrow, about standing in front of a reverend and promising things she might not be able to keep, about sharing a house with a man who was kind but unknowable, honest but remote, about the tools hidden in her trunk and the secret she'd carry until carrying it became impossible. Her father used to say that a good watch kept time honestly, without complaint, doing the work it was made for. That was all anyone could ask. Eliza hoped the same was true for people, that doing the work, keeping faith with the bargain, would be enough. Because it had to be. There was nowhere left to go but forward. Sometime after midnight, she finally drifted off, her last thought a half-formed prayer to no one in particular. Let this work. Let this be enough. Let me not have made a terrible mistake. In the other room, Caleb lay awake too, staring at the ceiling and wondering the same thing. Tomorrow would bring answers, or at least it would bring a wedding, and after that, they'd both find out what they'd really agreed to. The morning came too fast and too slow at the same time. Eliza woke to pale light filtering through the curtain, her body stiff from the unfamiliar mattress and the tension she'd carried into sleep. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then it all came back in a rush that felt like falling. Today. It was today. She dressed carefully in the only good dress she owned, dark blue cotton with buttons up the front. Her hands fumbled them twice before she got it right. In the washstand mirror, small and spotted with age, her reflection looked back with eyes that held more fear than she wanted to admit. The kitchen was empty when she emerged, but coffee sat warming on the stove and a plate of biscuits waited on the table, covered with a clean towel. Through the window, she could see Caleb by the barn, brushing down one of the horses with long, steady strokes. He'd changed into clean clothes, still work clothes, but newer. His hair was wet, slicked back from his face. Eliza poured coffee and forced herself to eat a biscuit she couldn't taste. Her stomach felt like it had been tied in knots by someone who knew their business. The sound of a wagon approaching made her freeze, cup halfway to her lips. Through the window, she watched as a couple climbed down. A man about Caleb's age, stocky and weathered, and a woman maybe 10 years older than Eliza, with a kind face and capable hands. The Pattersons, presumably. Come to watch her marry a stranger, Caleb met them, shaking the man's hand, nodding to the woman. They talked for a minute, too far away for Eliza to hear, then all three turned toward the house. She set down her cup and smoothed her dress one more time. This was it. No going back now. Not that there'd been anywhere to go back to in the first place. The door opened. Caleb came in first, followed by the couple. Up close, the woman had smile lines around her eyes and flower on her sleeve. The man had the same weathered look as Caleb, like the sun and wind had carved him from something tougher than regular flesh. "Eliza," Caleb said, his voice careful. "This is John Patterson and his wife Mary. They're our neighbors." "Pleased to meet you." Eliza's voice came out steadier than she felt. Mary stepped forward, taking both of Eliza's hands in hers. "Welcome, dear. I know this must all feel very strange, but you'll settle in. We all did." "Thank you." "I brought a cake," Mary continued, gesturing to something wrapped in cloth that John was carrying. "Figured we'd need something sweet to mark the occasion." "That's very kind." "Nonsense. We're neighbors now. We help each other out here. Have to, or none of us would make it." Another wagon appeared on the horizon, this one moving slower. The Reverend, Eliza thought, and her hands went cold despite the warm morning. Caleb saw her face. "You all right?" "Yes, just—" She stopped. There wasn't a good way to finish that sentence. "I know." And maybe he did. He looked nearly as uncomfortable as she felt. The Reverend turned out to be younger than Eliza expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes and a Bible so worn the cover was falling off. He introduced himself as Reverend Walsh, shook everyone's hands, and didn't seem to notice or care that the bride and groom could barely look at each other. "Well," he said cheerfully, "shall we get started? Beautiful day for it." They gathered in front of the house, the 5 of them, with the prairie stretching away in all directions like the world's largest witness. Reverend Walsh opened his Bible, found his place, and began. Eliza heard maybe half the words. The rest got lost in the sound of her own heartbeat and the wind moving through the grass. She heard "lawful wedded wife" and "sickness and health," and "till death do you part," phrases that sounded simple until you had to promise them out loud to someone you'd known for less than a day. When it came time to respond, her voice cracked on, "I do." Caleb's was steady, but his hands were clenched at his sides. "The ring?" Reverend Walsh asked. Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. Not new. Eliza could see the wear on it, the tiny scratches that came from years of use. His first wife's ring. She'd known it would be, but seeing it still felt like being struck. He slid it onto her finger. It was slightly too large, spinning when she moved her hand. "I now pronounce you man and wife. Caleb, you may kiss your bride." They looked at each other, caught. The Reverend waited. The Pattersons waited. The whole prairie seemed to hold its breath. Caleb leaned in and pressed his lips to hers, brief and chaste, over almost before it began. His lips were dry. His breath smelled like coffee, and Eliza's first kiss as a married woman felt more like signing a contract than anything romantic. It was done. Mary hugged her, warm and quick. John shook Caleb's hand with a grip that looked painful. Reverend Walsh closed his Bible with a satisfied snap. "Congratulations to you both. May your life together be blessed with health and happiness." They moved inside for dinner. The cake Mary had brought, along with cold chicken and bread and preserves, someone had made last summer. Eliza tried to eat, tried to smile, tried to act like a new bride instead of a woman who felt like she'd just jumped off a cliff and was waiting to see if there was water or rocks at the bottom. The Pattersons were kind, filling the silences with easy conversation about their own ranch, about the weather, about a barn raising planned for next month. Mary kept glancing at Eliza with a look that might have been sympathy or assessment or both. "How are you settling in?" she asked when the men stepped outside to look at something Caleb wanted to show John. "It's only been a day." "I know, but still. How are you holding up?" Eliza considered lying, then decided she was too tired. "I'm terrified." Mary's laugh was unexpected and genuine. "Well, that's honest. I like you already. Does it get easier? The fear? Eventually. The work? No, that stays hard, but you get stronger." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Caleb's a good man, quiet, keeps things to himself too much, but decent through and through. His first wife—" She stopped, seeming to weigh her words. She wasn't cut out for this life. Came from back east expecting something different. It wore her down long before the sickness got her. He told me she died of fever. She did. But she was half gone already. This place, the isolation, it broke something in her. Mary touched Eliza's hand. I'm not telling you this to scare you. Just so you know, he's been hurt. He's careful now. Might take time for him to trust that you're different. What if I'm not? Different, I mean. Are you planning to give up and run back east? There's nothing to run back to. Then you're already different. Sarah, his first wife, she always had somewhere else she wanted to be. You're here because this is where you need to be. That's not the same thing at all. The men returned before Eliza could respond. The Reverend made his excuses. 3 more stops today, needed to keep moving. The Pattersons left shortly after, with promises to visit soon and an open invitation to come by their place anytime. And then it was just the 2 of them, husband and wife, alone in a house that felt too quiet and too small at the same time. Caleb cleared the table without being asked. Eliza washed the dishes. They moved around each other carefully, like dancers who didn't know the steps. I should check the cattle, Caleb said when the last plate was dried. Won't take long. All right. He hesitated in the doorway. Your things from the spare room. I can move them to our room, if you want. Our room. The words hung between them, weighted with implications neither of them wanted to examine too closely. That's fine, Eliza said, because what else could she say? He nodded and left. Through the window, she watched him walk to the barn, his stride purposeful, like he was relieved to have something concrete to do. Eliza stood alone in the kitchen of her new home and tried to feel something other than numb. The afternoon stretched long. Caleb stayed outside, finding work that probably didn't need doing just to avoid coming back in. Eliza unpacked her trunk properly, hanging her few dresses on pegs in the bedroom, arranging her brush and mirror on the washstand. The room still held traces of Sarah, a faded ribbon tucked in a drawer, a water stain on the ceiling in the shape of something Eliza couldn't name. She wondered if Caleb saw his first wife everywhere he looked, or if time had finally worn those memories smooth. The larger trunk she left mostly packed. The tools stayed wrapped in oilcloth, hidden under her winter coat. Someday she might trust him enough to share that part of herself. But not today. Today was already complicated enough. When Caleb finally came in for supper, the sun was setting and Eliza had managed to make a passable stew from what she'd found in the pantry. They ate in the same uncomfortable silence as the night before, except now there were rings on their fingers and promises they'd made in front of witnesses. Stew's good, Caleb said eventually. Thank you. You're a better cook than... He stopped, started again. It's good. Than Sarah, he'd almost said. Eliza heard it anyway. After supper, Caleb brought in firewood, even though they didn't need it yet. Eliza mended a shirt she'd found in the bedroom, the stitching something to focus on besides the ticking clock and the approaching night. Finally, when the light was almost gone and there was no more work to hide behind, they stood facing each other in the main room like opponents before a fight. I'll bank the fire, Caleb said. I'll get ready for bed. In the bedroom, Eliza changed into her nightgown with shaking hands. She braided her hair. She turned down the bed she would now share with a man she'd married that morning. The sheets were clean but worn soft, and when she slid between them, she could smell sun and soap and the faint ghost of someone else's perfume. Caleb came in a few minutes later. He blew out the lamp before undressing, and Eliza was grateful for the darkness. She heard the rustle of clothes being removed, the creak of the bed as he lay down on the far edge, as far from her as the mattress allowed. They lay there in the dark, both rigidly still, neither touching, the space between them full of things unsaid. Eliza. His voice was quiet. Yes? I meant what I said yesterday. There's no expectation. Not tonight. I know. Just wanted to be clear. You are. More silence. Then, so soft she almost missed it. Good night. Good night. She lay awake for hours, listening to him breathe, feeling the mattress shift slightly when he moved. This was her life now. This bed, this house, this man. She'd chosen it, or chosen it as much as anyone chose anything when the alternatives were worse. Eventually, exhaustion won. She drifted off sometime before dawn, and if she dreamed, she didn't remember. The next days fell into a pattern. Caleb rose before sunrise to tend the animals and check the fence lines. Eliza learned the rhythms of the house, where the well bucket hung, how the stove liked to be fed, which floorboard creaked. They spoke in short sentences, practical things. Need anything from town? Chicken coop needs mending. Water barrel's running low. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't even unfriendly. It was just careful, both of them testing the boundaries of this new arrangement. Mary Patterson visited 3 days after the wedding, bringing eggs and gossip about people Eliza didn't know yet. She stayed for coffee, talking easily while Eliza listened and tried to memorize names and relationships. "You're doing fine," Mary said when she left. "Better than fine. Give it time." But time felt strange out here. Days blurred together, marked only by the work that needed doing. Eliza learned to feed the chickens, collect eggs without getting pecked, pump water without splashing. Her hands, used to delicate work with tiny tools, learned to grip a pitchfork and haul heavy buckets. She learned about Caleb, too, in small pieces. He was left-handed. He took his coffee black and bitter. He talked more to the horses than to her, his voice gentler when he thought no one could hear. He slept on his right side, curled in on himself like he was protecting something. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, he said a name that wasn't hers. Sarah. Eliza pretended she didn't hear it. A week after the wedding, Caleb came in from the barn with his shirt torn at the shoulder. "What happened?" Eliza asked. "Caught it on a nail, nothing serious." "Let me see." He hesitated, then pulled the shirt off. There was a scratch on his shoulder, not deep but long, beaded with blood. Eliza fetched water and clean cloth, gesturing him to sit. "This might sting," she warned. "I've had worse." She cleaned the wound carefully, aware of how close she was standing, how warm his skin was under her hands. She could feel him tense, whether from pain or proximity, she couldn't tell. "You're good at this," he said. "My father was sickly the last few years. I learned to tend wounds." "What did he do?" "Your father?" The question caught her off guard. She'd been so careful not to mention his work, afraid of where the conversation might lead. "He had a shop. Repairs mostly." "What kind of repairs?" "Small things. Clocks, watches, delicate work." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Did he teach you?" Her hands stilled. "Some. Useful skill. For a man, maybe." "Why only for a man?" "Because that's what everyone always said. Because women's hands were supposed to be for sewing and cooking and babies, not for understanding how gears meshed and springs coiled. Because she'd spent years hiding what she could do, afraid of being called strange or unnatural. "Just is," she said finally, tying off the bandage. He caught her wrist gently before she could step away. "I didn't mean to pry." "You didn't. If you want to talk about him, your father, I'll listen." Something in his voice made her look at him properly. His eyes were serious, his grip careful. He was trying, she realized, trying to build something between them beyond the practical partnership they'd agreed to. "Maybe sometime," she said quietly. He released her wrist. "Whenever you're ready." That night, Caleb didn't sleep on the far edge of the bed. Not close to her, not touching, but not avoiding her either. It was a small shift, barely noticeable, but Eliza noticed. The days kept coming. Eliza's body learned the work. Her hands roughened, her back strengthened. She stopped feeling breathless after carrying water from the well. She learned to read the sky for weather, to judge when the bread had risen enough, to tell which chicken was broody and which was just mean. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she and Caleb learned each other. She discovered he hummed while he worked, tuneless but constant, that he saved the best pieces of meat for her plate, that he slept fitfully before storms, restless in ways he never showed during the day. He learned that she was stronger than she looked, that she never complained, even when the work was hard, that she had a quick mind and a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard. They talked more, not about important things, not yet, but about the daily details that made up a life. Caleb told her about the land, which sections flooded in spring, where the best grass grew. Eliza asked questions, learning the things she'd need to know to survive here. "You're picking this up fast," he said one evening as they sat on the porch after supper. "Faster than—" He stopped himself. "Faster than Sarah?" He looked at her, surprised. "Mary told you about her?" "Some, and you say her name sometimes. At night." His face went still. "I didn't know that." "It's all right." "It's not, though. You're my wife now. You shouldn't have to—" He rubbed his face, frustrated. I'm sorry. You loved her. I did. But she's gone and you're here, and that's not fair to you. Eliza watched the sun sink toward the horizon, painting everything gold. My father used to say that fairness was a luxury, that most of us just had to make do with what we got. Sounds like a practical man. He was. She paused. He would have liked you, I think. Yeah. You're honest. He valued that. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the prairie change colors as the light faded. A cool breeze kicked up, carrying the scent of grass and distance. I should tell you something, Caleb said abruptly. About Sarah. About why. About what happened. Eliza waited, not pushing. She wasn't built for this. The isolation, the work, the endless sameness of it. She tried, I'll give her that. But she was miserable. Cried herself to sleep more nights than not. Begged me to sell the ranch, move to town, find different work. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I didn't. Told myself she'd adjust, that she just needed more time. But she never did. And then the fever came, and maybe, his voice cracked. Maybe part of her was relieved. You can't know that. I know she gave up fighting. I know I'd watch her fade a little more each day, and I didn't know how to stop it. Some people aren't meant for certain lives. That doesn't make it your fault. He turned to look at her. You really believe that? I believe you did what you could. Sometimes that's not enough, but that doesn't mean you failed. You're different from her, stronger maybe, or just more stubborn. I don't have anywhere else to go. That helps. Is that the only reason? Because you're stuck here? The question hung between them, serious in a way their conversations hadn't been before. Eliza thought about lying, about keeping things simple and safe. But Caleb had been honest with her. She owed him the same. At first, yes, but now... She paused, searching for words. It's not as terrible as I expected. The work is hard, but it's honest. And you're kind. You keep your word. That counts for something. That's a low bar. You'd be surprised how many men can't clear it. He almost smiled. I suppose that's true. A coyote called somewhere in the distance. The stars were beginning to appear, scattered across the darkening sky like someone had spilled salt. We should go in, Caleb said eventually. It'll be cold soon. But neither of them moved. They sat there a while longer, two people slowly learning that the bargain they'd made might turn into something more if they let it. That night, when they lay down in bed, Caleb's hand found hers in the dark. He didn't say anything, just held it loosely, his thumb moving slowly across her knuckles. Eliza's heart kicked against her ribs, surprised by the gesture and by how much it meant. She squeezed back, a gentle pressure that said she understood. When morning came, she woke to find him already up, the space beside her empty but still warm. Through the window, she could see him in the yard, splitting wood with steady rhythmic swings. She watched for a moment, then rose to start coffee. The weeks turned over. Summer deepened, the heat pressing down like something physical. Eliza learned to work in the early morning and late evening, resting during the worst of the midday sun. She learned which plants grew near the house, wild mint she could use for tea, sage that helped with cooking. She learned the sound of the wind through the grass, how it changed pitch before a storm. And she learned Caleb, his moods, his silences, his small kindnesses, the way he always made sure she ate first, how he mended her shoes without being asked, the careful way he touched her now, a hand at her back when she stumbled, fingers brushing hers when he passed her something. They were becoming something, not lovers, not yet, but not strangers anymore either. Partners, maybe. People who shared a life and were starting to figure out what that meant. One hot afternoon, with Caleb out checking fence lines, Eliza found herself alone in the house with time on her hands and an itch she couldn't ignore. She pulled the trunk from under the bed and unwrapped the oilcloth carefully. The tools gleamed in the light from the window, familiar and forbidden all at once. She lifted out her father's best magnifying glass, the one he'd given her when her hands got steady enough to work on hairsprings. On impulse, she went to the shelf above the stove where Caleb kept a few personal items. There was a pocket watch there. She'd noticed it her first day but hadn't touched it. Now she took it down carefully, feeling its weight in her palm. It had stopped. She could tell from the feel of it, the stillness that meant something inside had broken or wound down. She shouldn't. She knew she shouldn't. But her hands were already opening the case, already examining the movement with the practiced eye of someone who knew exactly what she was looking at. A broken mainspring. Simple fix if you had the right tools and the knowledge. She had both. She carried the watch to the table, spread out her tools, and let her hands remember what they knew. The work absorbed her completely. Everything else fell away. The heat, the worry, the careful performance of being a proper frontier wife. There was just the watch, the problem, and her hands moving with confidence they never showed anywhere else. She didn't hear the door open, didn't hear Caleb's boots on the floor, didn't know he was there until his shadow fell across the table and he said, his voice strange and tight, "What are you doing?" Eliza's hands froze. The watch lay partially disassembled before her, tiny gears and springs spread across the table like evidence of a crime. Her tools gleamed in the afternoon light, delicate and precise and completely damning. She looked up at Caleb. His face was unreadable, his eyes fixed on the watch, then on her hands, then on her face. "I can explain," she said, and hated how weak her voice sounded. "You're a watchmaker." It wasn't a question. She answered anyway. "Yes." He pulled out a chair and sat down slowly, still staring at the disassembled watch. "Your father's shop, the repairs you mentioned. He trained me from the time I was old enough to hold the tools steady. And you didn't think to mention this? Would you have believed me? Would you have—" She stopped, pushing down the fear rising in her chest. "Women aren't supposed to do this kind of work. I learned that young enough. People either don't believe you or they think you're strange, unnatural." Caleb picked up one of the tiny screwdrivers, examining it. "How long have you been doing this?" "Since I was 8. "And you're good at it?" "Yes." He set down the tool and looked at her directly. "Show me." "What?" "The watch is broken. You were fixing it. Show me how." Eliza's hand shook as she picked up the magnifying glass. But once she started explaining, showing him the broken mainspring, describing how she'd replace it, the shaking stopped. This she knew. This she could do. Caleb watched in silence as she worked, her hands steady and sure, installing the new spring she'd fashioned from a spare in her toolkit. When she closed the case and wound the watch, it ticked to life, keeping time like it had always known how. She set it on the table between them. Caleb picked it up, listening to the steady tick, then looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "That's remarkable," he said finally. "You're not angry?" "Why would I be angry?" "Because I lied. Because I kept this from you." "Did you lie or did you just not mention it?" "Does it matter?" "Yeah, I think it does." He turned the watch over in his hands. "This was my father's. Stopped working 2 years ago. I figured it was done for, too expensive to get fixed, too broken to bother with. And you just—" He shook his head. "How long did that take you?" 20 minutes, maybe. It wasn't complicated." "Eliza." He set the watch down and leaned forward. "Do you understand how useful this skill is? How valuable?" "I understand that most people think it's strange for a woman to—" "I don't care what most people think. I'm asking what you can do." She met his eyes, searching for judgment or disgust, and finding neither. Just curiosity and something that might have been respect. "I can repair most timepieces, clocks, watches, anything mechanical with gears and springs. My father said I had a gift for it. Steadier hands than his, better eyes." "And you've been hiding this why exactly?" "Because—" She faltered. "Because I didn't know how you'd react. Because in St. Louis, when people found out, they either didn't believe me or they treated me like I was some kind of circus act. Because I thought that I'd be like them. I didn't know. I still don't know you." "Not really." Caleb sat back in his chair, processing this. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a short, surprise sound. "What's funny?" Eliza asked, defensive. "I spent the last month worried you'd hate ranch life, worried you'd be miserable like Sarah, counting the days until you could leave. And the whole time you've been sitting on a skill that could make you independent if you wanted. You could set up shop in town, make your own money, not need me at all." "I need—" She stopped. "I didn't marry you planning to leave." "I know, but you could. That's my point. You don't have to be here. Neither do you. You could sell the ranch, move somewhere easier. This is my home." "Well," Eliza gestured around the kitchen, "maybe it's becoming mine too." They looked at each other across the table, the watch ticking steadily between them like a tiny heartbeat. "Can I ask you something?" Caleb said. "All right. Why did you really come here? And don't say it was just because you had nowhere else to go. There's always somewhere else. What made you get on that stage?" Eliza was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "I was tired of hiding, tired of making myself smaller so other people would be comfortable. When I read your letters, both of them, you sounded like someone who'd tell the truth even when it was hard, someone who kept his word. And I thought—" She paused. "I thought maybe with you I could stop pretending to be less than I am." "And are you?" "Pretending? Less than I was. But I'm still learning what it means not to." Caleb nodded slowly. "Fair enough." He stood, picked up the watch, and slipped it into his pocket. "Thank you for fixing this. It means something, having it work again." "You're welcome." He moved toward the door, then stopped. "Eliza?" "Yes?" "Don't hide your tools anymore. This is your house too. You don't have to be ashamed of what you can do." And then he was gone, back to whatever work he'd interrupted to come inside. Eliza sat alone at the table, surrounded by her tools, feeling like something fundamental had just shifted. She'd been so afraid of being discovered, so certain that revealing this part of herself would end in rejection or ridicule. Instead, Caleb had looked at her like she was more, not less. That night they lay in bed, closer than they had been before. Not touching, but not avoiding either. "Can I ask you something now?" Eliza said into the darkness. "Sure. The humming, when you work. What song is that?" She felt him go still beside her. "It's not a song, just something my mother used to hum. Can't remember the words if there ever were any, just the tune." "It's nice. You should hear me try to actually sing. Horses practically run away." She laughed, surprising herself. "That bad?" "Worse." They fell quiet, but it was a different kind of silence now, companionable. "Eliza?" "I'm glad you came here. I'm glad you got on that stage." Her throat tightened. "Me too." "Even with the isolation, the hard work?" "Even with that." His hand found hers again in the dark, and this time when he held it, it felt like a promise of something neither of them was quite ready to name. The morning after Caleb discovered her secret, Eliza woke to find him already gone and a note on the kitchen table, weighed down by his coffee cup. Gone to town. Back by supper. See, she stood there holding the scrap of paper, trying to read meaning into 6 words. Was he angry, after all? Had the reality of having a wife who fixed watches settled in overnight and turned strange? She made coffee with unsteady hands, her tools still spread across the table where she'd left them. No longer hidden, but not exactly displayed either. The day stretched long without him. She worked through her usual tasks, feeding chickens, collecting eggs, kneading bread. But her mind kept circling back to the previous afternoon. The look on his face when he'd found her. The way he'd asked her to show him, not demanded or mocked, but simply asked. And later, in the dark, his voice saying he was glad she'd come. Maybe that was enough. Maybe it had to be. The sun was low when she heard the wagon. She went to the window and watched Caleb climb down, not alone. John Patterson was with him, and they were unloading something from the wagon bed, a wooden crate, carefully handled. Eliza met them at the door, wiping flour from her hands. "Afternoon," John said, tipping his hat. "Caleb said you might be able to help with something." "Help with what?" Caleb carried the crate inside and set it on the table, pushing her tools carefully aside. "John's grandfather clock stopped working last winter. He was going to have to take it all the way to Wichita to find someone who could fix it." "Then Caleb mentioned you had a particular skill," John added. His expression was carefully neutral, watching her reaction. Eliza looked at Caleb, who met her eyes steadily. This was a test, she realized, not of her skill, but of whether she'd own it in front of someone else, whether she'd let herself be what she was or retreat back into hiding. "I can look at it," she said. "No promises, but I can try." John's face broke into a relieved smile. "That's all I'm asking. Mary's been after me about that clock since it stopped. Says the house doesn't sound right without it." They unpacked the clock mechanism carefully. It was quality work, maybe 60 years old, the brass tarnished, but the craftsmanship solid. Eliza ran her hands over it, feeling for what was wrong before she even looked. "When did it stop?" she asked. January, middle of that cold snap we had. Did it stop sudden or wind down slow? Wound down over a couple days, then quit altogether. She nodded, already forming theories. I'll need good light in a few hours. Can you leave it? Long as you need. Like I said, the alternative is a 3-day trip to Wichita. After John left, Caleb helped her move the mechanism to the table by the window, where the afternoon light was best. He didn't hover or question, just positioned it where she asked and stepped back. You told him, Eliza said quietly. I asked if he minded. He said if you could fix it. He didn't care if you were a dancing bear. High praise. He meant it as a compliment. She looked at him, then really looked. Why did you do this? Because hiding what you can do doesn't help anyone, because you're too good at it to keep it secret, and because, he paused, because I want you to be yourself here, whatever that looks like. Something warm unfurled in Eliza's chest, unexpected and a little frightening. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. If you can't fix it, John will probably never let me hear the end of it. But she could fix it. The problem was obvious once she got inside. A bent anchor that was catching on the escape wheel, probably from the cold making the metal contract unevenly. She had it corrected in under an hour, the clock ticking steadily by the time Caleb came back from evening chores. He stood in the doorway, listening to the measured beat. That was fast. It wasn't complicated, just needed someone who knew what to look for. And that's you. Yes, that's me. Word spread faster than Eliza expected. John must have told Mary, who told someone else. And within 2 weeks, Eliza had 3 more repair jobs waiting. A pocket watch from the general store owner in Redfield, a mantel clock from the school teacher, a delicate lady's watch that Mary herself brought over, her grandmother's, that hadn't run in 5 years. I can pay, Mary said. Whatever's fair. You brought me a cake on my wedding day, Eliza replied. Consider this trade. That cake was 50 cents of ingredients. This is skilled labor. Then bring me 50 cents of ingredients next time you visit. She fixed them all, her confidence growing with each successful repair. The work felt like coming home to a part of herself she'd locked away. Her hands remembered everything her father had taught her, and being able to use that knowledge openly, without shame or secrecy, was like breathing deeply after years of holding her breath. Caleb watched this transformation with something in his eyes that Eliza was learning to recognize, pride, maybe, or respect. He started bringing her mechanisms he found at estate sales in town, broken clocks that people were selling for parts. She'd work on them in the evenings while he mended tack or read from his small collection of books, the two of them sharing the space in comfortable quiet. One night, about a month after he'd discovered her secret, Caleb set down the harness he was working on and said, You could do this for real, you know. I am doing it for real. I mean as a business. Set up in town, charge proper rates. There's nobody doing this kind of work between here and Wichita. You could make good money. The idea was tempting and terrifying in equal measure. I'm needed here, on the ranch. You'd still live here. Just spend a few days a week in town, maybe. We could work it out. You'd be all right with that? Your wife working? My wife is working, just want to make sure she's getting paid fairly for it. Eliza set down the watch she'd been cleaning. Why does this matter to you so much? Caleb was quiet for a moment, his hands stilling on the leather. Sarah was miserable here because she had nothing of her own. Everything was about the ranch, about what I needed, what the land demanded. She felt like she was disappearing. He looked up. I don't want that for you. If you've got something that's yours, something you're good at, seems wasteful not to use it. You're not like most men. I don't know about that. Maybe I just learned from my mistakes. Maybe you're just decent. That bar is still too low. She smiled despite herself. Well, you keep clearing it anyway. The conversation shifted to other things, but the seed was planted. Over the next weeks, Eliza found herself thinking about it more and more. What would it mean to have her own income, her own enterprise? To be known for something other than being Caleb Turner's second wife? The answer came from an unexpected source. Reverend Walsh stopped by one afternoon carrying a beautiful German-made clock that had belonged to his mother. Stopped keeping time, he said apologetically. I know you're probably busy with the ranch, but Caleb mentioned you had a talent for this sort of thing. I can look at it. I can pay. Not much on a reverend's salary, but whatever you think is fair. She fixed it that evening, a simple mainspring replacement. When Walsh returned to collect it, he set $2 silver on the table. "That's too much," Eliza said. "That's what I'd have paid in Kansas City, and I'd have had to wait 3 weeks. Here, you did it in a day." He pocketed the watch. "I've been thinking. There's an empty storefront next to the general store in Redfield. Owner died last year. His son doesn't know what to do with it. You could probably lease it cheap. I don't know if... Just think about it. You've got a skill people need, and Redfield could use the business. Brings money into the town, gives folks a reason to stop here instead of going straight through to Wichita." He tipped his hat. "Talk it over with your husband. But I think you'd do well." After he left, Eliza sat at the table, staring at the $2 silver, her first real payment for her work. It felt heavy, significant in a way that had nothing to do with the actual weight of the coins. That night, she brought it up with Caleb. "Walsh thinks I should open a shop in town. What do you think?" "I think it's crazy. I've been here 2 months. I barely know anyone, and I'd be leaving you to manage everything here alone half the week. I managed alone before you came. That's not the same." "No," he agreed. "It's not. But Eliza..." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "You light up when you're working on those clocks. I see it. You're good at ranch work. You don't complain, but it's not what you were meant to do. This is. What about what you need? I need you happy. If that means you spend 3 days a week in town running a shop, then that's what it means. You make it sound simple. Maybe it is. Maybe we're the ones making it complicated." She looked at their joined hands, his calloused and scarred from years of hard work, hers growing rougher, but still capable of the delicate precision her craft required. 2 months ago, these hands belonged to strangers who'd made a practical arrangement. Now they belonged to people who were becoming something more, something neither of them had exactly planned on. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of what? That I'll fail, that people won't take me seriously, that I'll invest everything in this and it won't work, and then I'll have nothing. You'll still have the ranch. You'll still have me." "Will I?" His grip tightened. "Yes. Whatever happens with the shop or doesn't happen, that doesn't change. Promise?" "I promise." 2 weeks later, Eliza rode into Redfield with Caleb and stood looking at the empty storefront. It was small, just one room with a back area for storage, but it had good windows and a solid door. The rent was $15 a month, which seemed impossible until she calculated how many repairs she'd done in the past month and realized she'd already earned nearly that much. "What do you think?" Caleb asked. "I think I must be crazy." "That's not an answer." She took a breath. "I think I want to try." The shop opened in October, when the harvest work was slowing and Eliza could spare the time away from the ranch. She brought in a workbench Caleb helped her build, her tools carefully arranged, and a sign Caleb had commissioned from the carpenter, Moore's Clock and Watch Repair. He'd used her maiden name without asking, somehow understanding that she needed this to be hers alone. The first week was slow. A few curious visitors, one actual repair job from a farmer who'd been saving a broken watch for years. But word continued to spread, carried by people like Walsh and the Pattersons, and by the second week, she had steady work. She developed a routine. Monday through Wednesday in town, staying in a small room above the general store that cost 50 cents a night. Thursday through Sunday at the ranch, helping Caleb with whatever needed doing and catching up on the work she'd missed. It was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Caleb adapted too, taking on tasks Eliza usually handled without complaint. They'd reconnect on Thursday evenings, trading stories about their separate days, slowly learning this new rhythm of being together and apart. It was working. Against all odds, it was actually working. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. Eliza was at the shop, working on a particularly delicate pocket watch, when Caleb appeared in the doorway. He was supposed to be at the ranch. She wasn't expecting him until the weekend. One look at his face told her something was wrong. "What is it?" She set down her tools immediately. "It's nothing bad, just..." He came inside, closing the door behind him. "I need to show you something." He pulled a small wooden box from his pocket and set it on her workbench. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a lady's pendant watch, gold with delicate engraving on the case. It was beautiful, clearly expensive, and completely unfamiliar. "Where did this come from?" Eliza asked. It was Sarah's wedding gift from her mother. His voice was carefully controlled. "I found it this morning. cleaning out the last of her things from the bedroom. I thought I'd gotten everything years ago, but it was tucked in the back of a drawer. Eliza picked it up carefully. The engraving read, "To Sarah, with love, Mother." She opened the case. The mechanism was stopped, the hands frozen at 3:15. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked quietly. "Because I want you to fix it." "Caleb, I know how this looks, but I'm not—" He stopped, gathering himself. "I've been holding on to Sarah like she's still here, keeping her things, saying her name in my sleep, comparing everything to how she did it or didn't do it. And it's not fair to her memory, and it's not fair to you. You loved her. That's not something you just stop." "No, but I can stop living in the past." He touched the watch gently. "This should work. It shouldn't be frozen at the moment she died. And maybe if you fix it, if you're the one who makes it run again, that means something." Eliza's throat was tight. "What does it mean?" "That I'm choosing you, that I'm choosing now, not then." He met her eyes. "Fix it, please." She wanted to refuse. This felt too significant, too weighted with symbolism she wasn't sure she understood. But Caleb was looking at her with something raw in his expression, and she realized this was important to him in ways she couldn't fully grasp. "All right," she said. "I'll fix it." He left the watch with her and headed back to the ranch. Eliza sat alone in her shop, staring at the stop timepiece, feeling the weight of what he was asking. This wasn't just about making gears turn and springs coil. This was about letting go and moving forward, about honoring the past without being trapped by it. She worked on it over the next 2 days, careful and meticulous, giving it the attention such a beautiful piece deserved. The mechanism was in better shape than she'd expected. Quality work, well made, stopped more by neglect than by damage. She cleaned each component, replaced the mainspring, adjusted the regulator. When she wound it and heard it tick to life, the hands moving past 3:15 for the first time in 4 years, something in her chest loosened. That Thursday, she brought it home. Caleb was on the porch when she arrived, and she could tell from his posture he'd been waiting. She climbed down from the wagon and pulled the box from her bag. "It's done," she said simply. He took it, opened it, listened to the steady tick. His hand trembled slightly. For a long moment, he just stood there, and Eliza wondered if she'd misunderstood, if fixing it had been the wrong choice after all. Then he closed the box and looked at her. "Thank you. What will you do with it?" "I thought, if you don't mind, I'd like to sell it. Use the money for the shop or for something we need here. Something practical. Something for us." Eliza's eyes stung. "You don't have to." "I want to. It's time to let her rest. Really rest." He stepped closer, and for the first time since their wedding, he pulled her into his arms. It wasn't passionate or dramatic, just solid and real, his chin resting on top of her head, his heart beating steady against her ear. "I'm falling in love with you," he said quietly. "I don't know if that's what you want to hear or if it's too soon, or if I'm supposed to keep that to myself. But I'm tired of not saying things, tired of keeping everything locked up." Eliza's arms came up around him, holding tight. "I'm falling in love with you too. Have been for a while now. Yeah?" "Yeah." They stood there as the sun set, two people who'd started as strangers and were becoming something neither of them had dared to hope for. When they finally pulled apart, Caleb kept hold of her hand. "Come inside," he said. "I made dinner. It's probably terrible, but I tried." It was terrible. Burned stew and underbaked biscuits, but they ate it anyway, laughing about his lack of cooking skills, planning what they'd do with the money from Sarah's watch, talking about the future like it was something they were building together, instead of something that was just happening to them. That night when they went to bed, everything was different. The careful distance they'd maintained, the polite boundaries, the sense that this was temporary or conditional, all of it dissolved. Caleb reached for her and she reached back, and what happened between them was tender and awkward and human, marked by nervous laughter and whispered reassurances and the quiet discovery of what it meant to choose each other completely. Afterward, lying in the dark with her head on his chest, Eliza felt something she hadn't felt since her father died. Safe. Not because nothing bad could happen, but because whatever did happen, she wouldn't face it alone. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked, his fingers moving through her hair. "That I'm glad I got on that stage. Even with all the uncertainty, all the risk? Especially because of that, If I'd played it safe, I'd still be in St. Louis, slowly disappearing. You could never disappear. You're too stubborn. She poked his ribs. Is that a compliment? From me? Always. They drifted toward sleep, tangled together, the house settling around them. Through the window, stars scattered across the prairie sky like promises that might actually be kept. The next morning, Eliza woke before dawn to find Caleb already up, standing by the window in his undershirt watching the sunrise. She went to him, wrapped her arms around him from behind, and felt him lean back into her. Couldn't sleep? She asked. Didn't want to. Wanted to remember this. Remember what? Being happy. Really happy. Not just content or making do. He turned in her arms, cupping her face in his hands. I thought I'd had my chance at this. Thought I'd used it up with Sarah, and that was all I got. But here you are. Here we are. Here we are, he agreed. They stood there as the prairie turned gold with morning light, two people who'd taken a chance on a practical arrangement and found something far more valuable, a partnership built on honesty, respect, and the slow-growing trust that maybe they'd gotten lucky after all. The shop continued to thrive. By late autumn, Eliza had enough regular customers that she was considering expanding her hours. She'd also started teaching herself more advanced repairs, challenging herself with complicated mechanisms that other watchmakers might have given up on. One afternoon in early November, she was working on a ship's chronometer, a beautiful piece brought in by a trader passing through, when the door opened and a man she didn't recognize stepped inside. He was well-dressed, maybe 50, with the confident bearing of someone used to getting what he wanted. He looked around the shop with an assessing eye that made Eliza immediately wary. "Help you with something?" she asked, not standing. "Mrs. Turner? That's right." "Walter Hayes. I run a jewelry and timepiece shop in Wichita. I've been hearing interesting things about you." "Such as?" "That you're doing quality repair work, that you've got steady hands and good instincts, that you fixed a German chronometer last month that 3 other watchmakers had declared beyond repair." He smiled. "I'm always interested in skilled labor." "I'm not looking for work." "Hear me out. I could offer you a position in my shop, steady salary, access to better tools, more complicated work. You'd be working with some of the finest pieces in Kansas." "I have a shop. You have a room with a workbench. I have a business." He named a figure that made Eliza's breath catch. More money than she'd see in 6 months here. "That's generous," she said carefully, "but I'm not interested." "Think about it at least. You're too talented to be stuck in a prairie town fixing farmers' pocket watches. In Wichita, you could—" I said no. Hayes held up his hands. "My apologies. The offer stands if you change your mind." He set a card on her workbench. "That's where you can reach me. No pressure." After he left, Eliza sat staring at the card, her hands trembling. It was everything she'd once thought she wanted: recognition, opportunity, real money, a chance to work at the highest level of her craft. And she didn't want it. Not if it meant leaving Redfield, leaving the ranch, leaving Caleb. When had that happened? When had this place stopped being a refuge and become home? She told Caleb about the offer that evening. He listened without interrupting, his face carefully neutral. "What did you tell him?" he asked when she finished. "That I wasn't interested." "But you are, a little." "No, I mean—" She struggled for words. "It's flattering, and the money would be life-changing. But I don't want to live in Wichita. I want to be here, because you're stuck here, or because you choose here." "Does it matter?" "Yes, it matters." She took his hands, making him look at her. "I choose here. I choose you. I choose the life we're building. That shop, that offer, it's not worth what I'd lose." "You wouldn't lose me. Wichita's not that far. We could make it work if you wanted to." "I don't want to. That's what I'm trying to tell you." She squeezed his hands. "I spent my whole life looking for a place where I could be myself. And I found it. Here, with you." Something in his expression shifted, softened. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "I love you. I know I said it before, but I need you to hear it again. I love you, Eliza, not just because you stayed, but because you're you. I love you too, even when you burned dinner." That was 1 time. It was 3 times. All right, 3 times, but I'm getting better. They laughed and the tension dissolved, and that night, when they made love, it was different again. More confident, more knowing, marked by the understanding that they'd chosen each other not just once, but repeatedly, in small decisions and large ones, building something that might actually last. Winter came early that year, announced by a storm that rolled in fast and mean. Eliza made it home from town just ahead of the worst of it, and she and Caleb spent 3 days snowed in, the world reduced to the house and the barn and the whiteout conditions beyond. They worked together to keep the animals fed and watered, fighting through drifts that came up to Eliza's waist. They cooked together, read together, made love by the fire while the wind howled outside. And when the storm finally broke and they dug their way out, Eliza realized she'd enjoyed it. The forced closeness, the shared adversity, the reminder that they were a team. "We make a good pair," Caleb said, surveying the damage. All things considered. High praise. "I mean it. You didn't complain once, didn't panic, just did what needed doing." "So did you." "Yeah, well, I've had practice." They rebuilt what the storm had broken, repaired what could be saved, and moved forward. Because that's what you did on the prairie. You survived what came, you adapted, and you kept going. By December, Eliza's shop was profitable enough that she could contribute equally to the household expenses. It changed something between them, that financial partnership. She was no longer dependent on Caleb's charity or goodwill. She was an equal partner in every sense. One evening, working on year-end accounts together, Caleb said, "We should expand the cattle operation next spring. The market's good, and we've got the grazing land." "How much would that cost?" He showed her the figures. It was substantial but doable, especially with Eliza's income added to his savings. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think we should do it, but I want to expand the shop too. Maybe hire someone to help so I can take on more complicated work. We might be spreading ourselves thin, or we might be building something real." They looked at each other across the table, the lamp casting shadows that made them both look older, more serious. "All right," Caleb said. "Let's do both. Build it together." "Together?" Eliza agreed. And there it was, the thing that had been growing between them since that first awkward meeting in Redfield. Not romance in the storybook sense, not passion that burned hot and fast, but something deeper, more durable. A partnership based on respect and honesty and the daily choice to build a life together, piece by careful piece. They were building a marriage the way Eliza built a watch, with patience and precision, fitting each component carefully until the whole thing worked. It wasn't perfect. They still fought sometimes, still frustrated each other, still carried scars from before they'd met, but they were making something that would last, something that could withstand the storms and the isolation and the hard work. Something worth keeping. Spring came late that year, the ground staying frozen longer than anyone could remember. Eliza spent extra days at the shop, grateful for the warmth of the stove and the steady work that kept her hands busy. By April, she'd saved enough to hire a young man named Thomas Birch, fresh from an apprenticeship in St. Louis, who jumped at the chance to work under someone with her reputation. "You're really her?" he'd asked at the interview, starstruck. "The woman who fixed the Hamilton chronometer everyone said was dead?" "I'm really her," Eliza had confirmed, amused and slightly embarrassed. With Thomas handling the simpler repairs, Eliza could focus on the complicated pieces, the challenges that made her hands ache and her eyes strain, but left her feeling alive in ways ranch work never quite did. Caleb noticed the change in her, the way she practically vibrated with energy when she came home from town. "You're happy," he said one Thursday evening, watching her unpack her tools. "I am." "Good. You should be." But there was something in his voice that made her look closer. He seemed tired, his movement slower than usual, and there was a tightness around his eyes she didn't like. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Fine. Just busy. Spring calving's starting, and I'm down a hand since Morrison left for Colorado." "You should hire someone." "Can't afford it yet. Not till we sell the yearlings in fall." Eliza frowned. They'd talked about expanding, about growing the operation, but she hadn't fully grasped how much of the burden fell on Caleb alone when she was in town. Guilt pricked at her conscience. "I could stay home more, help with—" "No." His voice was firm. "We agreed. Your shop is important. I'm managing fine." "You don't look fine." "I'm tired, Eliza. That's all. Nothing a good night's sleep won't fix." But he didn't sleep well. She felt him toss and turn beside her, heard him get up twice during the night. In the morning, he was already out at the barn before she woke, And when she brought him coffee, she found him leaning against the fence rail, breathing hard like he'd been running. "Caleb?" He straightened quickly, taking the coffee. "Thanks." "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Just moved too fast, got a little dizzy." "You should rest today. Let me handle the morning chores." "I'm fine." But his hand shook slightly as he raised the cup, and Eliza's worry deepened. She stayed home that week, telling Thomas to manage the shop without her. Caleb protested, but gave up when he realized she wouldn't budge. Together they worked through the calving, delivering 3 healthy calves and losing one that came breech and suffocated before they could save it. The death hit Caleb hard, harder than it should have, Eliza thought, watching him stand over the tiny body with his jaw clenched tight. "It happens," she said gently. "You can't save them all." "I know that." "Then why does this one feel different?" He was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "Sarah was pregnant when she died. I didn't tell you that before." Eliza's breath caught. "Caleb, she was 3 months along. We'd just started to believe it might actually happen, that we might have a child. Then the fever came and—" His voice cracked. "I lost them both." She went to him, wrapping her arms around him from behind, her cheek pressed to his back. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It's been years. Shouldn't still hurt like this." "I don't think grief works on a schedule." He turned in her arms, holding her tight. "I want children with you. I know we haven't talked about it, but I do. I want a family." "So do I." Yeah. They stood there as the barn, surrounded by the smell of hay and animals, making plans for a future that felt more real than anything Eliza had imagined back in St. Louis. A future with children, with a growing ranch, with 2 businesses that supported each other. It was terrifying and wonderful, and so far from the cautious arrangement they'd started with that sometimes Eliza had to stop and remind herself this was real. But the worry didn't leave her. Caleb's tiredness persisted, along with occasional dizzy spells he tried to hide. She caught him gripping the fence rail more than once, saw him pause to catch his breath after tasks that shouldn't have winded him. When she pushed him to see a doctor, he refused. "It's just spring. Always wears me down." "This is different." "You're worrying over nothing." "Then prove me wrong. Go to town. See Dr. Matthews." "When I have time." But time kept slipping away, filled with work that couldn't wait, and problems that demanded immediate attention. A fence line down, cattle getting into the Pattersons' wheat field. A horse with an abscess that needed draining. Caleb handled it all with his usual quiet competence, and Eliza tried to believe he was right, that she was worrying over nothing. Then came the night in early May when everything changed. Eliza woke to find Caleb's side of the bed empty and cold. Through the window, she could see lamplight in the barn. She pulled on her robe and went to investigate, her bare feet cold on the packed earth. She found him collapsed against the barn wall, his face gray, breathing in shallow gasps. "Caleb!" She dropped to her knees beside him. "What happened?" "Just dizzy. Needed air. You're freezing. How long have you been out here?" "Don't know. Hour, maybe." "An hour." He'd been out here struggling while she slept, too stubborn or too frightened to call for help. Anger and fear warred in her chest. "We're going to the house. Now!" She got under his arm, taking as much of his weight as she could manage. He didn't protest, which scared her more than anything else. Caleb never accepted help unless he had no choice. She got him inside, into bed, piled blankets on top of him. His skin was clammy, his pulse too fast. She built up the fire, heated water for tea he couldn't keep down, and sat beside him through the rest of the night, watching his chest rise and fall, and praying to anyone who might listen that she wouldn't lose him. By morning, the worst had passed. His color was better, his breathing steadier. But when Eliza demanded they ride to town immediately to see Dr. Matthews, Caleb finally agreed without argument. The doctor was a gruff man in his 60s who'd seen everything the prairie could throw at the human body and wasn't easily rattled. He examined Caleb thoroughly, asked pointed questions, and finally sat back with a frown. "Your heart's working too hard," he said bluntly. "Could be a dozen things causing it. Could be nothing serious, or could be something that'll kill you if you don't slow down." "Can you fix it?" Caleb asked. "I can give you medicine that might help, digitalis from foxglove, but mainly you need to rest. No heavy work for at least a month." "That's impossible. It's spring, calving season." "Then hire help or sell some cattle. Because if you keep pushing like you have been, you'll be dead before summer. Matthews looked at Eliza. Can you make him listen? I'll try. They rode home in silence, Caleb's jaw set in stubborn lines. Eliza knew what he was thinking. They couldn't afford to hire help, couldn't afford to reduce the herd, couldn't afford to lose a whole season's work, but they also couldn't afford to lose him. I'll close the shop, she said finally. What? No. For a month, maybe 2. Thomas can handle the basic repairs and anything complicated can wait. Eliza, we need that income. We need you alive more. I'm not dying. You heard what Matthews said. If you don't rest, I'll rest. But you're not closing the shop. We worked too hard to build it. And we'll build it again if we have to. But right now, you're more important. They argued about it for the rest of the day, both of them exhausted and frightened and too stubborn to give ground. Finally, as the sun set and they sat across from each other at the dinner table, barely touching the food Eliza had prepared, Caleb reached across and took her hand. I'm scared, he admitted quietly. Me too. What if Matthews is right? What if it's serious? Then we'll deal with it, together. I don't want to leave you. Not now. Not when things are finally... He stopped, his grip tightening. I just found you. I can't lose this. You're not losing anything, but you have to take care of yourself, please. He nodded slowly. All right. I'll rest. But you keep the shop open. We compromise. I stay home 3 weeks out of 4. Thomas runs things in town, and I go in 1 week a month to handle the complicated work. 2 weeks a month. 3. Deal. They shook on it, a solemn gesture that would have been funny under different circumstances. Then Caleb pulled her around the table and into his lap, holding her like she might disappear if he let go. I love you, he said into her hair. If I haven't said it enough, I love you. You've said it plenty, but I never get tired of hearing it. The next weeks were strange, the usual rhythms of their life disrupted. Caleb chafed at the enforced rest, frustrated by his weakness, angry at his body for betraying him. Eliza took over most of the ranch work, hiring a boy from town to help with the heavy tasks. She was exhausted by the end of each day, her hands too tired to do delicate work even when she had time. But slowly, grudgingly, Caleb improved. The medicine helped, and the rest helped more. His color came back, his breathing steadied, the dizzy spells became less frequent. By the end of May, he was well enough to argue about doing light chores, and by June, he was back to half strength. I'm not an invalid, he grumbled when Eliza tried to stop him from fixing the chicken coop. No one said you were. You're treating me like I'm made of glass. I'm treating you like someone who collapsed in a barn 6 weeks ago and scared me half to death. He set down his hammer and came to where she stood, pulling her into his arms. I'm sorry. I know this has been hard on you. It's been hard on both of us. Yeah, but you've been carrying most of it. The ranch, the shop, worrying about me. That's too much. We're partners? That's what partners do. Still, I appreciate it. She pulled back to look at him. You're really feeling better? I am, I promise, and I'm following Matthew's orders. Mostly. Caleb. I'm taking the medicine. I'm resting when I need to, but I can't just sit around forever. A month ago, you could barely stand without getting dizzy. A month ago is not today. They found a new balance, slower and more careful than before. Caleb did less physical work but managed the ranch operations, making decisions about which cattle to sell, when to move them to new pasture, which improvements were priorities. Eliza split her time between the ranch and the shop, grateful for Thomas's steady competence in town. And gradually life began to feel normal again, or at least a new kind of normal. One where they both understood how fragile everything was, how quickly it could all disappear. One evening in late June, they sat on the porch watching the sunset, as had become their habit. The land was green with summer growth, the cattle fat and healthy in the distance. I've been thinking, Caleb said. Dangerous, he smiled. About expanding the house, adding on a room or two. For what? For children. When they come. Eliza's hand went automatically to her stomach. She'd suspected for a couple weeks now, but hadn't said anything, afraid to jinx it, afraid it might be false hope. But she was late, and her body felt different in ways she recognized from helping enough women to know the signs. Caleb, she said carefully, I think we might need that room sooner than you expect. He went very still. Are you saying I'm saying I'm about 6 weeks along, if I'm counting right. For a moment, he didn't react. Then his face broke into a smile so wide it transformed him, made him look younger and lighter than she'd ever seen him. You're sure? Not completely, but pretty sure. He stood, pulling her up with him, spinning her in a careful circle before setting her down and cupping her face in his hands. A baby. We're having a baby. We are. If everything goes right. It will. It has to. He kissed her, tender and reverent. You're going to be a mother. And you're going to be a father. Again. The shadow that crossed his face was brief but visible. Sarah's lost pregnancy, the child he'd never gotten to hold. But then he shook it off, choosing joy over grief. This is different, he said firmly. You're different, stronger. And I'm going to be here for all of it this time. You better be, because I have no idea what I'm doing. Neither do I. We'll figure it out together. They spent the rest of the evening making plans, imagining a future with a child running around the ranch, learning to ride horses, maybe even learning to fix watches. It felt distant and immediate at the same time, this new life they were creating. But the prairie had a way of reminding you that nothing was certain, that disaster could arrive without warning on a clear summer day. It came in August, when the heat was oppressive and the grass was dry as tinder. Eliza was home, her pregnancy now obvious enough that traveling to town had become uncomfortable. She was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when she smelled smoke. At first she thought it was something on the stove, but the smell was too strong coming from outside. She went to the window and saw it, a black smudge on the horizon, spreading fast. Prairie fire. Her heart kicked into overdrive. Caleb was out checking fence lines, miles away. The fire was moving toward them, pushed by the wind that had been building all day. She ran outside, trying to judge the distance. A mile, maybe 2. Not enough time to wait for Caleb. Not enough time to do much of anything except try to save what she could. The animals. She had to get the animals secured, keep them from panicking and running into the fire. She raced to the barn, throwing open the stalls, driving the horses and the milk cow toward the creek where they might find safety. The chickens were beyond help. She'd have to hope they scattered the right direction. The smoke was thicker now, burning her eyes and throat. She could see flames on the horizon, orange and hungry, consuming everything in their path. She grabbed blankets, soaked them in the water trough, draped them over the barn roof, hoping it might help. Then she heard hoofbeats. Caleb appeared through the smoke, riding hard, his face dark with soot. "Thank God," he gasped, sliding off the horse. "I saw the smoke and thought, the animals are at the creek. I couldn't get the chickens." "Forget the chickens. We need to create a fire break." They worked frantically, using shovels to dig a trench around the house and barn, clearing away dry grass and brush. Eliza's back screamed in protest, her pregnant belly making the work awkward and painful, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The fire was close enough now that they could hear it, a roar like an angry animal, consuming everything. The heat pressed against them, and the smoke made it hard to breathe. "It's not enough," Caleb shouted over the noise. "The fire break's not wide enough." "What do we do?" "We run, now. Take the horses and go to the creek with the other animals." "What about you?" "I'll try to save the house. If I can't, I'll follow." "Caleb, no. We leave together, or not at all." "Eliza, I'm not leaving you." He looked at her, seeing the terror in her face, and his resolve crumbled. All right, we go together." They mounted the horses and rode hard for the creek, the fire chasing them like something alive and vengeful. The heat was intense now, the smoke choking, and Eliza prayed that the baby inside her could withstand this, that they'd all make it through. They reached the creek just as the fire crested the hill behind them. The water was shallow, but wide enough to provide protection, and they drove the horses into it, watching as the flames swept past on either side. It was beautiful and terrible at once, the fire painting the sky orange and red, the smoke blotting out the stars. Eliza stood in the water beside Caleb, both of them soaked and shaking, and watched their home disappear into the inferno, or at least she thought it would disappear. But as the fire moved past, as the worst of it rolled on toward the Patterson place and beyond, she saw that the house still stood, scorched and smoking but intact, protected by the fire break they'd dug and sheer luck. The barn was gone. The chicken coop was gone. but the house remained. Caleb's shoulders shook, and Eliza realized he was crying. Silent, racking sobs that came from somewhere deep. She wrapped her arms around him, both of them standing in the creek while the fire moved on and the world smoked around them. "It's okay," she whispered. "We're okay. That's what matters. I almost lost you, both of you. But you didn't. We made it." They stayed in the creek until the fire was far enough away to feel safe, then returned to survey the damage. The house was blackened, several windows broken from the heat, but structurally sound. The barn was just charred timbers and ash. "We can rebuild," Eliza said, looking at the ruins. "It's just wood and nails. We'll have to use most of our savings." Then we use them. We rebuild, and we keep going. Caleb looked at her, this woman who'd come to him as a frightened mail-order bride and had become the strongest person he knew. "How are you so calm?" "I'm not calm. I'm terrified. But falling apart won't help, so I'm choosing not to." "I love you." "I love you too. Now come on. Let's see what we can salvage." They worked through the night, saving what could be saved, cataloging what was lost. By morning, they were exhausted and filthy, their hands blistered and their lungs raw from smoke. But they were alive. The Pattersons arrived at dawn, having fought off the fire themselves. John brought tools and lumber. Mary brought food and clean water. Together, they started the process of rebuilding. News of the fire spread through the community, and help arrived from unexpected places. The general store owner brought supplies on credit. The Reverend organized a work crew. Even Thomas came out from town, bringing Eliza's tools. He'd thought she might need something familiar to hold on to. "You didn't have to do this," Eliza said, fighting tears. "Of course I did. You gave me a chance when no one else would. This is the least I can do." Over the next weeks, a new barn rose from the ashes of the old one. It was smaller, more practical, but solid. The house was repaired, the broken windows replaced. And slowly, life returned to something approaching normal. Except nothing was normal anymore. Eliza's pregnancy progressed, her belly growing round and tight. Caleb's health remained stable but fragile, requiring careful management. The ranch operated at reduced capacity, the savings they'd planned to use for expansion now spent on rebuilding. But they had each other. And somehow, that made everything else bearable. One evening in September, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual they'd returned to despite everything, Caleb said, "I've been thinking about names." "For the baby?" "If it's a boy, I'd like to name him after your father, if you'd be all right with that." Eliza's throat tightened. "You don't even know his name." "So tell me." "Thomas. Thomas More. Thomas Turner. I like that." "What if it's a girl?" "Then you choose. Something strong. Something that sounds like someone who could survive anything." Eliza thought about it, running through possibilities. "What about Grace? Not because she'll be graceful, but because we need to remember Grace. To be gentle with ourselves and each other." "Grace Turner." Caleb tested it, then nodded. "Perfect." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky change colors, both of them aware of how close they'd come to losing everything and how grateful they were that they hadn't. "We're going to be all right," Eliza said quietly. "Aren't we?" "Yeah, we are. Not because it'll be easy, but because we'll fight for it. Together. Always together." And as the sun dipped below the horizon and the prairie settled into twilight, they held hands and believed it. Whatever came next, the birth of their child, the continued rebuilding, the uncertain future, they would face it the same way they'd faced everything else. Side by side, honest and imperfect, choosing each other over and over again until choosing became as natural as breathing. The first snow came early in October, unusual for Kansas, but not unheard of. Eliza stood at the window watching fat flakes drift down, one hand resting on her swollen belly where the baby kicked and turned restlessly. She was 7 months along now, moving slowly, her back aching constantly, but grateful to have made it this far. Behind her, Caleb stoked the fire, then came to stand beside her, his arm settling around her shoulders. "You're thinking too hard," he said. "I'm always thinking." "About what?" "Everything. The baby. Whether we'll have enough hay to get through winter, if the new barn roof will hold under heavy snow, whether I'm ready to be a mother." "Nobody's ever ready. You just do it." "That's not reassuring." He kissed her temple. You'll be fine. Better than fine. You're the most capable person I know. I fix watches. That doesn't translate to raising children. Both require patience, steady hands, and the ability to figure out how things work. Seems pretty similar to me. She leaned into him, grateful for his certainty even when she had none of her own. The baby kicked hard, and Caleb's hand moved to join hers, feeling the movement. Strong, he murmured. Takes after the mother. Or stubborn. Could take after either of us on that count. They stood there watching the snow accumulate, both aware that this winter would test them in new ways. The rebuilt barn was functional, but not as warm as the old one. Their savings were depleted, and soon there would be a baby, helpless and demanding, changing everything they'd built. Mary Patterson visited the next day, bringing a cradle her own children had outgrown and enough knitted baby clothes to outfit twins. "You don't have to do this," Eliza protested, overwhelmed by the generosity. "Yes, I do. We take care of each other out here. That's how we survive." Mary set the cradle by the fire, running her hand over the worn wood. "This has held 4 babies safe. It'll hold 1 more." "Thank you." "How are you feeling? Really?" Eliza considered lying, then decided Mary would see through it anyway. "Scared, excited, terrified, grateful, all at once. That sounds about right." Mary settled into a chair with a sigh. "Caleb doing all right? John said he's been pushing himself pretty hard with the rebuilding. He says he feels fine. I'm not sure I believe him." "Men are terrible at admitting weakness. You know that already." "Doesn't make it less frustrating." Mary laughed. "No, it doesn't, but he's got you watching over him. That counts for something." After Mary left, Eliza found herself staring at the cradle, trying to imagine an actual baby in it. Her baby. Caleb's baby. The reality of it still seemed impossible some days. She went to the bedroom and pulled out the trunk that held her tools. She hadn't done any delicate work in weeks. Her hands shook too much from exhaustion, and her vision seemed slightly off, probably from the pregnancy. But she needed to touch them, to remember that part of herself. Thomas was managing the shop beautifully. He'd written that business was steady, that he'd taken on 2 apprentices of his own, that customers still asked about her but understood she'd return after the baby came. If she wanted to return, that is, he'd be honored to buy her out if she preferred to focus on family. The offer was generous and tempting. She could sell the shop, use the money to rebuild the ranch operations, stay home and focus on being a wife and mother. It was what most women did, what she was supposed to want. But the thought of giving it up made her chest tight with something like panic. "What are you doing?" Caleb asked from the doorway. "Just thinking." "About the shop? How did you know?" "You get a certain look. Like you're working through a complicated problem." He came to sit beside her on the bed. "Thomas made you an offer, didn't he?" "How do you, He asked me first if I thought you'd be interested. Wanted to make sure he wasn't overstepping." Eliza looked at him. "What did you tell him?" "That it was your decision, not mine, not his, yours." "But what do you think I should do?" Caleb was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I think you should do whatever makes you happy. If that's selling the shop and staying home, fine. If that's going back to work after the baby comes, also fine. I didn't marry you to trap you in any particular life. Most husbands wouldn't feel that way. I'm not most husbands, and you're definitely not most wives." He touched her belly gently. "This baby is going to have a mother who can build things, fix things, run a business. That's not a bad example to set. Even if I'm not there every day? Even then, maybe especially then." He paused. "My mother worked. Took in laundry, mending, whatever would bring in money. I never thought less of her for it. If anything, I admired her for doing what needed doing instead of what people expected." Eliza leaned her head against his shoulder. "I don't want to choose between being a mother and being a watchmaker." "Then don't. Do both. Badly at first, probably, because everything's bad at first, then better, then maybe even good. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, it's just possible. There's a difference." 2 weeks later, Eliza woke in the middle of the night to wetness and a tightening pain that made her gasp. For a moment she didn't understand, then realization hit like cold water. "Caleb!" She shook his shoulder. "Caleb, wake up!" He was up instantly, lighting the lamp. "What's wrong?" "The baby's coming." His face went pale. "Now? It's too early." "Tell that to the baby." "I'll get Mary. You stay here, don't move. I'm not going anywhere, just hurry. He was out the door before she finished speaking, riding hard for the Patterson place. Eliza tried to stay calm, breathing through contractions that were already coming faster than she'd expected. Too fast. This was happening too fast. Mary arrived within the hour, taking charge with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd done this many times. She got Eliza cleaned up, into a clean nightgown, propped up in bed with pillows. "How close are the pains?" Mary asked. 5 minutes, maybe less. "And your water broke?" "Yes." Mary felt Eliza's belly, her expression serious. "This baby is in a hurry. First ones usually take their time, but not this one." "Is that bad?" "It's not ideal, but we'll manage." She turned to Caleb, who hovered in the doorway looking terrified. "I need hot water, clean towels, and you need to stay calm. Can you do that?" "Yes, I think. Maybe." "Good enough. Get moving." The labor was hard and fast, nothing like the long, slow process Eliza had been told to expect. Pain came in waves that left her gasping, and somewhere in the middle of it she understood why women died doing this, why Sarah had been afraid. But Mary was there, steady and sure, coaching her through each contraction. And Caleb was there too, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, whispering encouragement even though his voice shook. "You're doing so good," he kept saying. "So good, Eliza. Almost there." "Don't lie to me," she gasped between contractions. "I'm not lying. Mary says—" "I can hear Mary myself. I know what almost means." Despite everything, he almost smiled. "There she is. There's my stubborn wife." The baby came just before dawn. A girl, small but loud, with a shock of dark hair and Caleb's gray eyes. Mary wrapped her in a clean blanket and placed her in Eliza's arms, and the world narrowed to that tiny face, those searching eyes, those impossibly small fingers. "Grace," Eliza whispered. "We're calling her Grace." Caleb sat beside them, his hand trembling as he touched his daughter's head. "She's perfect. She's tiny, but healthy. Strong lungs, that's for sure." Mary bustled around cleaning up, giving them privacy. "I'll check on you both in a few hours. Right now, you all need to rest." After Mary left, Caleb and Eliza sat in bed with Grace between them, too amazed to sleep despite their exhaustion. The baby's eyes drifted closed, her breathing settling into the steady rhythm of sleep. "We made this," Caleb said quietly. "You and me. We made a whole person. Terrifying, isn't it?" "Completely." They watched Grace sleep, both of them overwhelmed by the responsibility of keeping this tiny creature alive and safe. Everything they'd survived, the fire, Caleb's illness, the hard winters and uncertain harvests, all of it seemed insignificant compared to the enormous task of raising a child. "What if I'm not good at this?" Eliza asked. "What if you are?" "I'm serious. So am I. You're going to make mistakes. So am I. But Grace won't know the difference because we're all she's got. She'll think whatever we do is normal." That's a disturbing thought. Or a comforting one. Depends on how you look at it. Grace stirred, making small sounds that weren't quite cries. Eliza lifted her carefully, and the baby nuzzled against her, seeking comfort in a way that was pure instinct. "She knows you," Caleb said, wonder in his voice. "She knows warmth and food. That's about it. Still, she knows you're safe." And maybe that was enough, Eliza thought. Maybe being safe was the most important thing she could offer this small person who hadn't asked to be born into a world of prairie fires and hard winters, and parents who were making everything up as they went. The first weeks were brutal. Grace cried constantly, day and night blurring into an exhausted haze. Eliza's body ached from the birth, her breasts sore from nursing, her mind foggy from lack of sleep. Caleb helped where he could, walking the floor with Grace when she wouldn't settle, handling ranch work with one hand while holding the baby in the other. "I don't know how people do this multiple times," Eliza said one night after Grace had finally fallen asleep. "I can barely survive one. We're surviving, though. That counts." "Does it? Or are we just stumbling through?" "Most people are just stumbling through. They're just better at hiding it." Mary visited regularly, bringing food and advice and occasionally taking Grace for a few hours so Eliza could sleep. The community rallied around them in ways that still surprised Eliza. Casseroles appeared on their doorstep. Firewood was stacked without them asking. Someone fixed a loose board on the porch while they weren't looking. "This is what people do," Mary explained when Eliza tried to thank her. We take care of each other because out here, we're all we've got. By the time Grace was 2 months old, some semblance of routine had emerged. She slept for longer stretches, cried less, and occasionally smiled, real smiles, not just gas, that made all the sleepless nights worth it. Eliza started thinking about the shop again. Thomas wrote regularly with updates, always ending with reassurances that she should take whatever time she needed. But the thought of going back, of using that part of her brain again, was increasingly appealing. "What if I went to town for 1 day a week?" she asked Caleb one evening. "Just Wednesdays. You could manage Grace for 1 day, couldn't you? We'd figure it out." "You're sure?" "Eliza, you've been patient with me. Let me be patient with you now. If you need the shop, go back to the shop." "I don't need it. You do need it. And that's fine. Grace needs a mother who's happy more than she needs a mother who's present every single minute." So Eliza returned to the shop just 1 day a week at first, leaving detailed instructions and enough milk for Caleb to feed Grace. The first time she left was agony. She made it halfway to town before nearly turning back. But she forced herself to continue, and when she sat down at her workbench, picked up her tools, and felt that familiar focus settle over her, she knew she'd made the right choice. Caleb managed, sometimes barely, sometimes with Grace screaming the entire day, but he managed. And Eliza came home renewed, ready to be a mother again, able to appreciate Grace's small smiles and growing awareness instead of just surviving the endless cycle of feeding and changing and soothing. "How was she?" Eliza would ask. "Terrible, wonderful, mostly terrible." Caleb would hand over the baby, exhausted but grinning. "Your turn." They were figuring it out, messily, imperfectly, but genuinely. Winter deepened, snow piling high around the house. The new barn held up well under the weight, the animals stayed healthy, and Grace grew steadily, hitting milestones that Eliza recorded in a small book Mary had given her. One evening in January, with Grace asleep in her cradle and snow falling heavy outside, Caleb pulled out the account books. "We need to talk about next year," he said. "All right. The cattle operation is stable but not growing. The shop is doing well, according to Thomas. But we're not saving much, and if we want to expand, either the ranch or your business, we need to make decisions." Eliza had been thinking about this too. What if we partnered with the Pattersons? Combined operations, shared expenses? "I thought about that. John mentioned it last month, actually. Said they're getting older, their boys aren't interested in ranching, and they could use the help. Would that work?" "Financially, yes. We'd pool resources, split profits. It would free me up to help you with the shop, or let you expand into other towns." They talked through the details, making plans that stretched into the future. A future that looked different than either of them had imagined back when Eliza first stepped off that stagecoach in Redfield. Bigger, more complicated, but also richer. Spring came again, as it always did. Grace was nearly 6 months old, sitting up on her own, grabbing at everything within reach. Eliza had expanded her shop days to 2 per week, and Thomas had taken on more responsibility, essentially running the day-to-day while she focused on the complex work. The partnership with the Pattersons was formalized, papers signed, operations combined. It meant less income immediately, but more stability long-term, and it meant Caleb wasn't working himself to death trying to manage everything alone. One warm afternoon in May, Eliza was at the shop when a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Walter Hayes, the man from Wichita who'd tried to hire her away years ago. "Mrs. Turner," he said pleasantly. "It's been a while." "Mr. Hayes, what brings you to Redfield?" "You, actually. I heard you were back at work and I wanted to make another offer. I'm still not interested in moving to Wichita. That's not what I'm offering. I want to buy watches from you, custom pieces, high-end work. You'd make them here, I'd sell them in Wichita and take a commission, your name on every piece." Eliza set down her tools. "You want to sell my work?" "I've seen what you can do. That chronometer repair, the custom pieces you've made for local clients. You're wasted on simple repairs. You should be creating." He named a figure per piece that made her breath catch. "That seems high." "That's what the market will bear. People pay for quality, and you make quality." He leaned forward. "Think about it. No pressure, but this could be real money. Enough to expand, hire help, maybe even open a second location if you wanted." After he left, Eliza sat staring at the business card he'd left behind. This was bigger than she'd ever imagined. Not just fixing things, but creating them. building a reputation beyond this small town, making a name for herself based purely on skill. She told Caleb about it that evening, expecting him to be cautious or concerned. Instead, he got excited in his quiet way. You should do it. It would mean more time away, more work. It would also mean security, a real future for Grace. Maybe more children if we're lucky. He took her hands. You've been holding yourself back since we met, always making yourself smaller to fit into what you think this life should be. But what if you didn't? What if you just let yourself be as big as you actually are? I don't know how to do that. Yes, you do. You've been doing it piece by piece. First the shop, then hiring Thomas, now this. Each time you're scared, and each time you do it anyway. She looked at him, this man who'd started as a stranger, become a partner, and turned into the person who believed in her more than she believed in herself. What did I do to deserve you? She asked. Got on a stagecoach, took a chance. Everything else just followed. Eliza accepted Hayes's offer. She started creating custom pieces, pouring all her skill into watches that were as much art as timepieces. The work was demanding but satisfying in ways repair never had been, and it paid well enough that they could hire help for both the ranch and the shop, freeing up time for what actually mattered. Grace grew, hitting each milestone with the determination of someone who'd inherited her parents' stubbornness. She took her first steps at 10 months, her first words at a year. Mama and Papa, and inexplicably, Cow. That's your influence, Eliza told Caleb. I'm choosing to take it as a compliment. They were happy. Not in some fairy tale way where everything was perfect, but in the messy, complicated way of real people building a real life. They fought sometimes, usually about Caleb taking on too much or Eliza working too late. They struggled with money, with exhaustion, with the endless demands of ranch life and business ownership and parenthood. But they also laughed. They made love on lazy Sunday mornings when Grace napped. They sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the prairie change with the seasons, making plans and sharing silence in equal measure. When Grace was 2, Eliza got pregnant again. Another girl, born in the spring, who they named Ruth after Caleb's mother. And 2 years after that, a boy, Thomas, as promised, though they called him Tommy to avoid confusion with Thomas Birch. The house expanded to accommodate them all. The shop expanded too, eventually opening a second location in Wichita with Thomas managing the Redfield shop and Eliza splitting time between both. The ranch prospered under the partnership with the Pattersons, and when John and Mary finally retired, Caleb and Eliza bought them out, giving their neighbors enough to live comfortably in town. Years passed. Grace started helping in the shop, showing an aptitude for delicate work that made Eliza's heart swell. Ruth was all Caleb, quiet and steady, happiest with the animals. Tommy was his own person entirely, curious about everything, never content to sit still. There were hard years too, a drought that nearly broke them, another prairie fire, less severe but still terrifying. Caleb's heart condition flared up periodically, reminding them that time was precious and uncertain. But they survived everything the prairie threw at them, held together by the partnership they'd built and the love they'd chosen over and over again. On their 20th anniversary, Caleb gave Eliza a watch he'd commissioned from a craftsman in Denver. It was beautiful, the case engraved with a scene of the prairie, grass and sky and a single house on the horizon. Open it, he said. Inside, along with the mechanism, was an inscription. To Eliza, who took a chance on a stranger and built a life. With all my love, C. It's beautiful, she said, her voice thick. You're beautiful. Still. After 20 years and 3 children and everything we've been through, he touched her face gently. I'd do it all again, every hard moment, every struggle, as long as I got you at the end. Even when I'm stubborn? Especially then. They stood together in the house they'd built and rebuilt, surrounded by the evidence of their life. Children's drawings on the walls, tools on the table, ledgers showing businesses that thrived through sheer determination. It wasn't the life either of them had imagined, but it was the life they'd created together, piece by careful piece. Grace appeared in the doorway, 14 now, and too much like Eliza for comfort. Mama, there's a watch in the shop that's giving me trouble. Can you look at it? What's the problem? The balance spring keeps catching. I've tried everything. Let me see your hands. Eliza examined Grace's fingers, noting the slight tremor. You're frustrated. That's what's causing the shake. Take a break. Come back to it fresh. But the customer needs it tomorrow. Then I'll finish it. You've done good work so far. She turned to Caleb. Mind if I... Go. I'll start dinner. You're going to burn it. Probably, but it'll be an adventure. Eliza followed Grace to the shop, walking the familiar path she'd walked thousands of times. The evening light was golden across the prairie, and somewhere in the distance she could hear Ruth singing to the horses, Tommy laughing at something only he understood. This was her life. This exact moment, no better or worse than it actually was. And it was enough, more than enough. She settled at her workbench, picked up her tools, and felt that familiar peace settle over her. The peace of doing what she was meant to do, in the place she was meant to be, surrounded by people who knew her completely and loved her anyway. Grace worked beside her, their hands moving in similar patterns, the same steady focus in both their faces. Outside, Caleb called the children to dinner, his voice carrying across the yard. Tommy protested, Ruth laughed, and the sounds of their family filled the evening air. And Eliza Moore Turner, who'd gotten on a stagecoach 20 years ago with nothing but fear and a hidden skill, looked around at everything she'd built and felt something she'd never quite believed in back then. Contentment. Not happiness exactly, because happiness came and went, but deep lasting contentment with a life honestly lived and a love honestly earned. Mama, Grace asked, what are you smiling about? Just remembering? Remembering what? The day I met your father, how scared I was, how certain I was making a mistake. But you weren't. No, I wasn't. Eliza touched the watch at her neck, feeling its steady tick against her skin. Sometimes the scariest choices turn out to be the right ones. You just have to be brave enough to see them through. Grace considered this, then returned to her work. And Eliza did the same, her hands steady and sure, fixing what was broken and making it whole again, just like she'd been doing all along. The years continued their steady march. Eliza and Caleb grew older together, their hair graying, their hands more gnarled, their bodies slowing down in ways they both pretended not to notice. But they were still them, still partners, still in love, still building the life they'd chosen. Their children grew up and made choices of their own. Grace took over the shops, expanding into 3 locations and training apprentices who carried on the tradition. Ruth married a neighboring rancher and raised children who ran wild across the same prairie that had once seemed so foreign to Eliza. Tommy, true to form, surprised everyone by becoming a doctor, drawn to fixing people the way his mother fixed watches. And through it all, Eliza and Caleb remained at the center, quieter now, less active, but still the foundation everything else was built on. One evening in their 70th year, they sat on the porch as they had thousands of times before. The sun was setting, painting the prairie in familiar golds and reds. Caleb's hand found Eliza's automatically, their fingers interlacing with the ease of 5 decades of practice. No regrets? He asked quietly. About what? Any of it. Getting on that stage? Marrying me? Staying here? Eliza thought about it. Really thought. Not just giving the easy answer. She thought about the fear and the uncertainty, the hard work and the sacrifice, the dreams she'd given up and the dreams she'd found instead. No regrets? She said finally. You? Not a single one. They sat in companionable silence, watching the day fade into night. And when the stars came out, scattered across the prairie sky like tiny promises kept, they were still there. 2 people who'd taken a chance on each other and built something that lasted. Not because it was easy, not because it was perfect, but because they'd chosen it, day after day, year after year, until choosing each other became as natural as breathing. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.